Hey, this is Lindsay. I'm out here at Kahia Creek MX today to try out the 2021 Kawasaki KX450. We're now in our third year for this generation of the KX450, and they brought three main changes to the table. One of them that's the most minor is a coating on the skirt of the piston. That's a reliability item and just kind of durability. We also have one that a few people have been clamoring for a couple years, a little bit stouter bar. We went from a 7/8 to an 1.1 bar. It's actually the same bend that has come stock on the Honda last year. Kawi and Honda have always kind of had that same bend on their 7/8s. A couple years ago, Kawi went to a little bit lower bend, a little bit closer. And even, in that low to mid-height range of a rider up to close to 6 foot, it just seemed to fit the ergos better. And I was really stoked to see that change also come to the Kawasaki, because the Kawi's always had a little bit tighter foot peg to seat ratio. And with that bigger, taller bar, made your legs feel like they were a little too close to you and you were sitting upright in the bike. That little bit lower bar makes it a little bit easier to get into the bike, a little bit more of a racy position. And the final change is what's kind of their biggest item for the year, is called their cone disc spring clutch. So the actual clutch diameter itself, first off, has changed. It's 10 millimeters larger, and it's actually what the factory Kawasaki 450 team has been using for quite a few seasons now. So they've changed the diameter of that clutch, you get a little bit more torque capacity out of it. They've changed the fibers themselves. The way the material's laid on is angled different, so it grabs a little bit stouter when it's traveling the direction that it moves. And then the cone disc spring itself is replacing all the small coil springs that you normally tighten down your clutch with this actual cone disc in this plate section that moves the clutch all at once. It kind of eliminates some of that flex you get in a pressure plate by having all those individual springs running it and the twisting that can happen. It just adds a more positive engagement. Of course, in 19 was the first year the Kawasaki went to the Hydro. I like the Nissan Hydro a lot. It has a little more of a cable feel because it has a longer throw. Going to the cone disc, it has an even longer throw. You just feel kind of like the cable. From the moment you pulled initially till it's almost back to your finger, you can feel it engage more and more over time. A little bit odd to me is Kawasaki has stuck with the same suspension settings they have since 2019. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It does make some of the improvements easy to find out because it's kind of the same changes we've been going over the past few years. I do feel like out of the box, the bike is really comfortable, very plush, but it misses a little bit on bike balance at times. In some of the past years we've tested, I've been a bit on the lighter side, down towards the 155 range. I felt like on the lighter side, I always wanted to get a little bit of spring rate out of the rear because I actually quite liked where the forks were. It had a 5.0 stock spring, that's the same as the Honda and the Suzuki 450 with a similar system. It just has kind of a softer initial feel in the fork because it has a low oil height. So for me on the lighter side, I would tend to drop the spring rate, try to soften up the rear and increase that oil height a little bit to get some speed sensitivity out on the fork. I'm a little bit on the heavier side this year, a little closer up there where most vet guys are, or I say vet guys, your standard general rider. Up in that 180 and above range, definitely throwing a 5.2 fork spring in one leg, if not both, helps out quite a bit to bring the balance up in the bike. Also, once again, a little bit of oil definitely helps this fork get some speed sensitivity out of it. I don't necessarily not like the stock suspension. Like I said, the Kawi has been really comfortable in that aspect. Just for the more aggressive rider, somebody who really wants to push their braking zones right over the front end, it just would dive a little bit and just throw the balance off. But it's not a chassis thing. The chassis is extremely comfortable. It's just a little bit of a balance that you can chase based on your weight and your riding style. The chassis itself on the KX450 definitely took a big overhaul in 19. It's really the first KX450 that feels like it can steer with the front. It still has its natural tendency to be a rear steer motorcycle, but they've gone a lot more comfort out of the chassis. The front end follows the ground a lot better. For me personally, I run the forks flush. I'm fine with how quick it can turn in. I naturally have good traction, being shorter arms. I'm on the front part of the bike, so I always get a quick turn in. So I tend to slow down the steering on this bike a little bit. But if you need a little bit quicker input, somebody that's maybe coming off like say a Suzuki, you can definitely just bump up the fork height a little bit in the clamps and be able to get more weight on the front end. The engine on the KX450 hasn't had a major change since 19, outside of the clutch and a couple minor additions that are reliability related. So we're kind of still dealing with that same overall power. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's a very broad, usable power. I wouldn't call it arm jerking at any point, and for me, coming a couple months off of doing the team and not really riding myself much, it's a fun motorcycle to jump on. You can get a lot out of the bike, you feel like you're actually maximizing the power everywhere, but at the same time, it's not too much. I'm not calling the bike slow, but I'm just not calling it the rocket that rips your arms off. It's kind of that just right amount to make you feel like you're having a good time, but you got enough power to get everything done. Mapping wise, we went through all the couplers. With the clutch change, it changed my opinion a little bit. Prior years, I would say run the black coupler, which is the mellow one, because of the way you could actuate the throttle and the ruts was a little better. It sounds backwards, but because the clutch is more precise, I like a stouter mapping, because before you had a judder spring in the clutch that would flex, so as the power would lay on, the clutch would have a dead point as it slid and hit that judder spring, so then the bike would snap to life. Now, because the clutch is engaging more initially and properly, as you roll on the throttle, it's there, it's already moving. The black coupler on this model particularly feels a little dead. Green is good, very well rounded. White is a little bit stouter, snappier initially, but dies off a little bit on top. So ultimately, is the 21 KX450 a buy? The updates on it aren't drastic. Yes, they are a positive, and it makes it a better machine than the 20 model, but at the same time, Kawasaki is really good with the rebates. Also though, because of the pandemic, we're having a hard time finding bikes left over on the showroom floor. If somebody came to me and told me they could still find a 20 for a good deal, I would do it. I think the extra money, you could do a few other things to the bike that would make a bigger improvement. But at the same time, for the value, if you're out there looking at the new machine and that's what's available, the 21 KX450 is definitely an improvement over the 20 model.
If you enjoy this video, make sure you hit like and subscribe. It allows me to keep creating content like this for you guys to watch. If you have any further questions, throw them in the comments section below and I will answer them. And speaking of the comments section, check out the first pinned comment for more info on the bike that I wasn't quite able to squeeze into this 6-minute video. Thanks again for watching.